The wind carried dry dust across the streets of Redstone, Colorado, in the summer of 1884. The afternoon sun burned high above the town, turning every rooftop into shimmering waves of heat. At just 19 years old, Clara Bennett stood outside the small farmhouse where she had spent every day of her life. In her arms, wrapped inside a faded blue blanket, slept her 3-month-old baby boy, Ethan. She had nowhere to go. She had no husband. She had less than $4 hidden inside her dress. Before sunset, she would lose the only family she had ever known. Within a year, one of the richest ranchers in Colorado would arrive in town searching for a woman whose courage had quietly changed many lives. He would ask for Clara by name. He would not see a girl who had failed. He would see the strongest woman he had ever met. One day, he would ask her to build a future beside him. But on this hot afternoon, nobody believed such a future could ever exist. Her father believed only one thing. She had brought shame upon the family. The front door opened slowly. Benjamin Bennett stepped onto the porch with a leather travel trunk in one hand. His broad shoulders were stiff beneath his worn coat, and his weathered face carried no sign of mercy. He stopped beside the porch railing and looked toward the mountains instead of looking at his daughter. "You made your choice," he said quietly. Clara tightened the blanket around Ethan. Her hands trembled, but she kept her voice calm. "I loved someone who promised to marry me." Benjamin finally turned. "And where is that man now?" His words struck harder than a slap. The father of Clara's child had worked with a railroad construction crew passing through Redstone. He had promised marriage before winter. He had promised a little cabin beside the river. He had promised to return after collecting his wages. Instead, the train left. He never came back. Not a single letter arrived. Not a single dollar. Not a single word. Benjamin dropped the trunk onto the porch with a heavy thud. "You are no longer welcome in this house." Behind him stood Clara's mother, Margaret. Tears filled her eyes as she twisted her apron between shaking hands. She wanted to run forward. She wanted to hold her daughter one last time. Instead, fear kept her frozen. In those days, many families believed a father's pride mattered more than a daughter's pain. "I still need you," Clara whispered. Benjamin's expression never changed. "You stopped being my daughter the day that child was born." The words stole the air from Clara's lungs. She looked toward her mother. Margaret lowered her eyes. She could not speak against the man who ruled their home. Clara bent down, picked up the old trunk, balanced Ethan carefully against her shoulder, and walked away without another word. Each step across the yard felt heavier than the last. She passed the apple tree where she used to swing as a little girl. She passed the old barn where her father had once taught her to ride horses. She passed the front gate she had opened thousands of times before. Today it closed behind her forever. The neighbors watched through their windows. Some whispered. Some simply stared. No one came outside. By evening, Clara reached the edge of town. The smell of horses, coal smoke, and fresh-cut lumber drifted through the streets. Redstone had become a busy stop for freight wagons and cattle buyers. Strong men laughed outside saloons while merchants counted coins inside their stores. Nobody noticed the frightened young mother carrying her sleeping child. She found a tiny room above an old bakery. The landlord frowned the moment he saw Ethan. "You'll have to pay every Friday." "I will. If you miss one payment." "I understand." The room was barely large enough for one bed, one chair, and one cracked window. Still, it was shelter. That night, Clara opened the trunk her father had thrown onto the porch. Inside, she found 2 faded dresses, one family Bible, and several baby blankets she had sewn before Ethan was born. Hidden beneath the blankets rested a folded piece of cloth. Inside the cloth were 3 silver coins. There was also a small handwritten note. Her hands began to shake before she even unfolded it. "My precious Clara, forgive me. Your father cannot see beyond his pride. I could not stop him. These coins are all I could hide. Please keep my grandson safe. If God gives me courage one day, I will find you. Love always. Mother." Clara pressed the letter against her heart. For the first time since leaving home, she cried without trying to hide the tears. Not because she had lost her home, because she realized her mother still loved her. Ethan stirred softly, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers. Clara wiped away every tear before looking down at him. "You still have me." The baby smiled in his sleep. That tiny smile became enough reason to keep going. The following weeks became a battle against hunger. Before sunrise, Clara swept floors inside the bakery downstairs. After breakfast, she washed dishes at a hotel. During the afternoons, she stitched torn shirts for miners and ranch hands. At night, she mended blankets by candlelight while Ethan slept beside her. Every coin mattered. Every meal was earned. Many people judged her before learning her name. The women at church avoided sitting beside her. Children were told not to speak with her. Even some customers refused to let her touch their clothing after hearing she had never married. Clara stopped trying to explain herself. She simply worked harder. Winter arrived early. Snow covered the rooftops before Thanksgiving. The little room became colder each night. The price of firewood doubled. Some evenings Clara skipped supper so Ethan could drink warm milk. She wrapped him inside every blanket she owned before sitting beside the freezing window until morning. One bitter evening, Ethan began coughing. At first, Clara thought it was only the cold. Then his tiny forehead became hot. His breathing grew faster. His little body shook inside her arms. Fear rushed through her like ice water. She wrapped him tightly and hurried through the snow toward the town doctor's office. The streets were almost empty. The wind cut across her face until her cheeks burned. She knocked desperately. The doctor opened the door only halfway. "My baby is sick," Clara pleaded. "Please help him." The doctor looked at Ethan. Then he looked at Clara's empty left hand. "No wedding ring." His expression hardened. "My fee is $2. I only have 70 cents. Then I suggest you find someone else." He started closing the door. Clara placed one hand against it. "Please. My son may die." Before the doctor could answer, another voice spoke behind her. "Then open the door." The voice was deep. "Come." "Certainly." A tall man stood behind Clara, his dark wool coat covered in fresh snow. His broad hat shadowed most of his face. A pair of leather gloves covered rough working hands, and beside him stood a powerful black horse breathing clouds into the cold night air. Without saying another word, the stranger reached into his coat and placed 2 gold coins into the doctor's hand. "The child will be treated," he said quietly. The doctor looked at the gold. His attitude changed immediately. He stepped aside. "Bring the baby in." Clara turned toward the stranger, desperate to thank him. But before she could speak, he simply gave a small nod. Then he removed his hat for a moment. Their eyes met. There was kindness in his face. Not pity. Not judgment. Only quiet respect. Clara had never seen him before. She did not know his name. She did not know that this silent cowboy would one day change her entire life forever. The doctor worked for nearly 3 hours beside the small iron stove, while Clara sat quietly with Ethan in her lap. The baby's fever was dangerously high, and every minute felt longer than the last. Outside, snow covered the streets of Redstone until the town seemed wrapped inside a blanket of white silence. The stranger never left. He stood near the window without speaking. Sometimes he watched the snow. Sometimes he looked toward the child resting in Clara's arms. His calm presence filled the little office with an unexpected feeling of safety. Just before dawn, Ethan's breathing became slower. The fever finally began to break. The doctor wiped his hands and nodded. "He'll recover." Clara closed her eyes in relief. Tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. She turned toward the stranger. "Thank you." He tipped his hat politely. "You don't owe me thanks. You saved my son's life." He smiled only slightly. Any decent man would have done the same. Before Clara could ask his name, he stepped outside into the falling snow. Within seconds, both the man and his horse disappeared into the early morning mist. She never even learned who he was. Life returned to its familiar struggle. Every sunrise brought another day of hard work. Clara cleaned rooms at the hotel before breakfast. She baked bread in the bakery until noon. During the afternoons, she stitched clothes for ranch hands, and at night she rocked Ethan to sleep while repairing worn blankets beneath a tiny oil lamp. Her hands became rough. Her shoulders ached constantly. But she never complained. She had learned something during those difficult months. No one was coming to rescue her. She would build a future herself. As Ethan grew older, his laughter slowly filled the little room above the bakery. Whenever Clara felt tired enough to give up, one smile from her son reminded her why she kept fighting. Spring finally reached Colorado. The snow melted across the valleys. Green grass returned to the hills. The cattle drives began again. Every week-long lines of wagons rolled through Redstone carrying supplies, lumber, tools, and grain toward ranches scattered across the territory. One bright afternoon, Clara carried fresh bread toward the hotel kitchen when the sound of polished wagon wheels echoed across Main Street. People stopped working. Merchants stepped outside their stores. Children gathered along the wooden sidewalks. 6 large ranch wagons entered town, each carrying the brand of Silver Creek Ranch, one of the biggest cattle operations in western Colorado. Cowboys rode proudly beside the wagons. At the front traveled an elegant black carriage. When it stopped, a tall man climbed down. He wore a dark wool coat, polished boots, and a silver watch chain across his vest. Every merchant greeted him with respect. Several businessmen hurried over to shake his hand. Clara looked up. Her heart skipped. It was the stranger from the doctor's office. Only now he looked completely different. He wasn't dressed like a traveler. He looked like a man who owned half the valley. He glanced across the street. Their eyes met again. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward her. People watched curiously. He stopped only a few feet away. "Miss Clara Bennett." She nodded slowly. "Yes." He removed his hat. "My name is Nathan Cole." She recognized his voice immediately. "You were the man who helped Ethan." Nathan smiled. "I hoped your little boy recovered." "He did." "I'm glad." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Clara asked the question she had wondered for months. "Why did you help us?" Nathan looked across the busy street before answering. "My younger sister once needed someone to stand beside her." His voice became quieter. "No one did." Clara saw sadness pass across his face. She died believing she had no value. He looked back at Clara. "I promised myself I would never ignore another woman who simply needed kindness." Those words settled deeply inside her heart. Nathan glanced toward the hotel. "I've been asking about you." Clara looked surprised. "You have?" The hotel owner, the baker, even the schoolteacher. Her face grew warm. "They all told me the same thing." "What did they say?" "They said you're the hardest working woman in this town." Clara lowered her eyes. "I only do what I must." Nathan smiled. "I need someone exactly like you." She looked up. "My ranch house needs a full-time housekeeper." He continued before she could answer. "The position includes a private room, a larger salary, warm meals, and there's plenty of space for Ethan." Clara stared at him. She wondered if she had misunderstood. I don't think people would approve." Nathan gave a small laugh. "When have people ever approved of doing the right thing?" She hesitated. They'll say terrible things. They already do. The words were honest. Neither of them argued. Nathan folded his hands behind his back. I don't hire people because of gossip. I hire people because of character. I've watched you for months. I've seen you leave before sunrise. I've seen you work until dark. I've seen you carry your son through every hardship without asking anyone for pity. His voice remained calm. I trust women like that. Clara felt tears filling her eyes again. Nobody had spoken to her with such respect since she had left home. When would you need me? Nathan smiled. As soon as you're ready. She looked toward Ethan playing quietly beside the bakery steps with a little wooden horse someone had carved for him. She imagined another winter inside the freezing room. Another year of endless work. Another year of people whispering behind her back. Then she imagined her son running across open fields beneath blue skies. She already knew the answer. I accept. Nathan nodded once. I'll return tomorrow morning. The move to Silver Creek Ranch changed everything. The ranch house stood on a gentle hill overlooking wide green pastures, filled with grazing cattle and wildflowers. It was larger than any home Clara had ever seen. Inside were polished wooden floors, tall stone fireplaces, and windows looking across endless rolling land. Nathan introduced her to every ranch hand personally. This is Miss Bennett. She deserves the same respect as anyone working here. No one questioned his decision. No one laughed. No one whispered. For the first time in many months, Clara felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt welcome. The days settled into a peaceful routine. She prepared meals, organized supplies, managed the household, helped keep the ranch accounts in order whenever Nathan traveled to nearby towns. She soon discovered that Nathan never treated her like a servant. Every evening they shared supper at the same table. He asked about Ethan. He listened whenever Clara spoke. He never interrupted. He never judged. Slowly trust began growing between them. Ethan adored Nathan almost immediately. Every afternoon the little boy waited beside the porch whenever riders returned from checking the cattle. The moment Nathan appeared, Ethan ran across the yard with laughter echoing through the valley. Nathan always pretended to act surprised. Well now, looks like someone has been waiting for me. Then he lifted the little boy high into the air until Ethan laughed so hard that even the ranch hands smiled. One warm evening Nathan returned carrying a small wooden rocking horse. I found this in Denver. Ethan hugged it immediately. Clara watched quietly. You spoil him. Nathan laughed softly. No. I simply enjoy seeing him smile. As summer passed into autumn, something changed inside the ranch house. It no longer felt like a place where people worked. It felt like a family beginning to grow. One evening, Ethan took his first steady steps across the sitting room. Nathan had just entered through the front door after checking fences along the north pasture. The little boy released the chair beside him. Clara held her breath. Ethan smiled at Nathan. Then he walked. One step. Another. Then another. Nathan knelt with his arms open. The little boy stumbled forward and fell safely into them. Nathan held him tightly against his chest. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Clara whispered with a smile. You saw his first real steps. Nathan looked down at the laughing child. I think he knew exactly where he wanted to go. Those simple words stayed in Clara's heart long after that evening ended. For the first time since she had become a mother, she no longer felt alone. Autumn painted the Colorado hills with shades of gold and crimson. The mornings became cooler, and a gentle fog often rested over the pastures before the sun climbed above the mountains. Silver Creek Ranch had become more than a place of work for Clara. It had become the first place where she and Ethan truly felt they belonged. The ranch hands respected her. The cook trusted her. Even the neighboring ranchers spoke kindly whenever she visited town for supplies. But not everyone was pleased by her happiness. News traveled quickly across small frontier towns. It did not take long before Clara's father heard that his daughter was living at one of the finest ranches in the territory. He could not accept it. In his mind, Clara was supposed to spend the rest of her life suffering for what he believed was her mistake. One Sunday afternoon, a rider appeared at the front gate. Clara recognized the old brown horse immediately. Benjamin Bennett. She froze. Nathan was inspecting fences on the southern range, leaving only a few ranch hands nearby. Benjamin stopped his horse without climbing down. His face looked older than Clara remembered, but his pride remained exactly the same. "So this is how you live now," he said coldly. Clara stood on the porch with Ethan holding her hand. "I work here." Benjamin laughed without humor. "You expect me to believe that? I don't need you to believe anything." His eyes swept across the large ranch house. "You traded your shame for comfort." Clara felt the old fear trying to return. For a brief moment, she became the frightened girl standing outside her childhood home once again. Then she looked down. Ethan smiled up at her. The fear disappeared. She straightened her shoulders. "I earned every meal under this roof." Benjamin pointed toward the house. "People are laughing at our family." "No," Clara answered quietly. "They're laughing at a father who abandoned his own daughter." The words struck him harder than he expected. His face turned red. "You speak to me with respect." "I always did." She looked directly into his eyes. "You were the one who forgot what respect looked like." Before Benjamin could answer, another horse approached across the yard. "Nathan." He dismounted calmly and walked toward the porch. His expression remained peaceful, but there was strength in every step. He stopped beside Clara. "What seems to be the problem?" Benjamin looked at the wealthy rancher with open anger. "You've welcomed a sinful woman into your home." Nathan never raised his voice. "I welcomed an honest woman. You know nothing about her." "I know enough." Nathan looked toward Clara before continuing. "I know she works harder than anyone I've ever hired. I know she would give her last piece of bread to feed her son. I know she carries herself with more dignity than people who spend their lives judging others." Benjamin tightened the reins. "You've ruined your reputation." Nathan smiled slightly. "A reputation built on cruelty isn't worth protecting." The ranch yard became completely silent. Several ranch hands had stopped working to watch. Benjamin realized no one stood beside him. For the first time in years, his words carried no power. He turned his horse. "You'll regret this." Nathan answered calmly. "The only regret I have is that she spent 19 years believing your love had conditions." Benjamin rode away without another word. Clara watched until he disappeared beyond the hills. Only then did the tears come. Nathan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You never have to face him alone again." She nodded silently. Winter arrived with heavy snow. Business became difficult across Colorado. Several cattle buyers canceled their contracts after a harsh season damaged grazing land. Prices fell. Expenses grew. One evening, Nathan sat alone inside his office, studying the ranch books. Clara entered quietly carrying fresh coffee. She immediately noticed the worry on his face. "What happened?" Nathan sighed. "The bank wants payment before spring." "How much?" He hesitated. "More than I can raise before the next cattle sale." For the first time since meeting him, Clara saw uncertainty in his eyes. She returned to her room. At the bottom of her old trunk rested a small velvet pouch. Inside was a gold locket. It had belonged to her grandmother. Her mother had secretly placed it inside the trunk before Clara left home. She had protected it through hunger, through loneliness, through every difficult winter. Now she carried it back downstairs. She placed it gently on Nathan's desk. "Sell it." Nathan looked up immediately. "No, it belongs to your family." She smiled softly. "You are my family." Nathan slowly closed the little box. "I can't take this. You already gave Ethan a future. You gave me a home. If this ranch falls..." She looked around the office. "All of us lose everything." Nathan stared at her for several long seconds. Finally, he whispered, "I've never known anyone like you." The locket became part of the payment that convinced the bank to extend Nathan's loan. Silver Creek Ranch survived another season. But spring brought a far greater test. A violent storm rolled across the mountains one afternoon, while Nathan and several cowboys gathered cattle from the northern valley. Rain became hail. Hail became snow. By sunset, visibility had nearly disappeared. Hours passed. The ranch hands returned one by one. Nathan did not. Just after midnight, his riderless horse wandered into the yard. Its saddle was covered with snow. One stirrup hung broken against its side. Clara's heart stopped. Without waiting for permission, she gathered blankets, lanterns, and medical supplies. An older ranch hand tried to stop her. "The storm's too dangerous." "If he's still out there," Clara answered, "he's waiting for someone." She hitched a sturdy workhorse to a small sled and followed the tracks before fresh snow covered them completely. The freezing wind burned her face. Ice gathered in her hair. For nearly 3 hours, she searched through deep drifts. Finally, she spotted the horse tracks ending beneath a fallen pine tree. Nathan lay trapped underneath a heavy branch. His shoulder was injured. His face was pale from the cold. He was barely conscious. Clara struggled with every ounce of strength she had. Little by little, she pulled the branch aside. She wrapped Nathan inside thick blankets. Then she secured him onto the sled. The journey home felt endless. Several times the horse nearly lost its footing. But just before sunrise, the lights of Silver Creek Ranch appeared through the storm. The ranch hands rushed outside. Together they carried Nathan inside. For 2 days he drifted in and out of sleep. Clara rarely left his bedside. On the 3rd morning, he finally opened his eyes. The first face he saw was hers. "You came." His voice was barely stronger than a whisper. Clara smiled through tired eyes. "You once saved Ethan. I simply returned the favor." Nathan reached for her hand. "No. You gave me something greater." "What?" "A reason to keep fighting." Several months later, the ranch celebrated its largest cattle sale in years. The business recovered completely. The bank debt disappeared. Silver Creek Ranch became stronger than ever. One warm evening, Nathan invited every ranch hand, neighbor, and merchant to a celebration beneath hundreds of hanging lanterns. Music filled the valley. Children laughed across the fields. Families gathered beneath the stars. When everyone had finished supper, Nathan stood. The crowd slowly became quiet. He walked toward Clara. Every eye followed him. He stopped only inches away. "When I first met Clara," he began, "I saw a young mother standing alone outside a doctor's office. Most people saw shame. I saw courage. I've watched her build this ranch. I've watched her raise Ethan. I've watched her teach every one of us what real strength looks like." He reached into his coat. Then he knelt before her. The entire ranch held its breath. "Clara Bennett, you gave my house warmth. You gave this ranch a heart. You gave my life purpose. Will you marry me?" Clara covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She looked toward Ethan. The little boy grinned as if he already knew the answer. She looked back at Nathan. Yes. The valley erupted with applause. Ranch hands cheered. Women wiped tears from their faces. Even the toughest cowboys smiled without embarrassment. Several days later, just before the wedding ceremony began, someone quietly entered the small ranch chapel. Margaret Bennett, Clara's mother. The two women looked at each other for only a second before embracing tightly. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered through tears. "I should have fought for you." Clara gently held her mother's hands. "You came. That's enough." The wedding was simple but beautiful. Wildflowers decorated the little chapel. Ethan proudly carried the wedding rings. When Nathan lifted the boy into his arms after the ceremony, nobody saw a child born into shame. They saw a son deeply loved. Years passed. Nathan and Clara built one of the most respected ranches in Colorado. They welcomed more children into their family, but Ethan always remained the first little boy who had brought them together. Clara never forgot the lonely mothers still struggling across the frontier. With Nathan's support, she opened a small boarding house near Redstone where single mothers could find work, shelter, and hope until they could build new lives. No woman was ever turned away. Many years later, Benjamin arrived at the ranch once again. This time he was old. His hands shook. His voice had lost its anger. "I was wrong." The words came slowly. "I chose my pride over my daughter." Clara looked at the man who had once broken her heart. There was no hatred left inside her. Only peace. "I forgive you." Benjamin lowered his head. He finally understood what he had lost. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains years later, Clara and Nathan sat together on the porch watching their grandchildren chase each other through the fields. Nathan gently squeezed her hand. "Do you remember the night outside the doctor's office?" Clara smiled. "I remember thinking God had forgotten us." Nathan kissed her hand softly. "He hadn't." She leaned against his shoulder while Ethan laughed with his own children across the yard. At 19, Clara had been told she would never belong anywhere again. Now generations of her family filled the ranch with love, laughter, and hope. The home she had once lost became something far greater. She had built one of her own, and this time no one could ever take it away.